Mexican music, especially from the north of Mexico. It's an interesting mix between like traditional corrido music and sort of rap elements and other urban music kind of elements. And I'll be explaining the historical development and what makes this music so unique and, in my opinion, fire. Yeah, so the origin of corridos. They originated actually during the Mexican Revolution at the beginning of the 20th century. They originally served like a political and journalistic purpose. So, most of these songs would tell narratives and spread news about events that were going on during the war. So, they'd be literally someone saying, oh, this guy did this, and, they won the battle here. And they were the main form that news was transmitted during this war, and they played a pretty instrumental role in doing so. Yeah, like it said, some of them were very subversive. So the thing with the Mexican Revolution was it was pretty sectarian. There were very much, different factions that supported different leaders and had different visions for how, the country should, be after this war. It was a very complex and very bloody war. But a famous example I'll play for you guys that you guys have probably heard of is La Cucaracha, which means the cockroach. It's interesting, people always think like, yeah, cockroach is a bug, but it's actually referring to a very specific person, Victoriano Huerta, who was a political leader that staged a coup that began the second stage of the Mexican Revolution. He was viewed as a traitor, hence the name of the song. And it has there's a couple variations, but it has interesting lyrics such as, La cucaracha ya no tiene mota pa fumar, which means he has no more weed to smoke. Ya no puede caminar, he can't walk, because he was also reputed as a drunkard. So, yeah. Another important song is Mi General Zapata, which is, referring to another leader of a faction, although this one expressed support for him. Zapata was a very popular figure during the Mexican Revolution. He was, a farmer, he had a lot of agrarian support, and his Plan de Ayala was very important for, proposing land reforms that would redistribute land to farmers, especially in the wake of, everything that occurred, but eventually he died because he was killed. And Huerta also died because he was killed. So very turbulent time in Mexico's history, but if you could play the first song, it's an interesting look.
Voy a cantar un corrido que anda en toditas las voces de una mujer de la tropa que todo el mundo conoce. En el pueblo de Conejos, por una calle muy quieta, viene triste y derrotado el valiente Antonio Zeta. La cucaracha, ya no puede caminar, porque le falta, porque no tiene marihuana que fumar.
Iban los tres en silencio, sus pensamientos rumiando, mientras el destino ciego los hilos iba tramando. En los cascos del caballo suena el polvo del camino. Ya se van, llora un cariño malogrado.
La cucaracha, ya no puede caminar, porque le falta, porque no tiene marihuana que fumar. Ya el águila voló, ya el nopal quedó solito, el fruto de tus amores ya no dista del olvido. Ya murió la cucaracha, ya la llevan a enterrar entre cuatro sopilotes y un gato de sacristán. La cucaracha, ya no puede caminar, porque le falta, porque no tiene marihuana que fumar. Y aquí termina el corrido que cantó a la cucaracha, la cucaracha, la cucaracha.
Yeah, so that song is just like, kind of like, shitting on his grave, essentially. This was recorded after he died, so it's pretty interesting in that way. Yeah, so an important thing to keep in mind with Corridos Tumbados is that the lyrical content shifted quite a bit. It's not really political anymore, and that's because of, a development that occurred in the corrido genre called narcocorridos, which unsurprisingly refers to songs about the cartel and, narcotics traffickants. So, they still tell stories, but a new context, this time primarily about cartel leaders and, everything they do, all the people they kill. They originated in the 30s, but became really popular in the 80s and 90s when, I don't know if any of you guys have seen Narcos Mexico or know anything about the history of, the cartel in Mexico, but this was a period where, the drug trade really began to ramp up, and figures like Amado Carrillo Fuentes, Felix Gallardo, Rafael Cada Quintero, just a lot of songs about them and their exploits. Pictured here is Chalino Sanchez, who's the king of corridos. He really revolutionized the genre and became like a figurehead of the scene, and sang a lot of songs about the cartel. Another example is Los Tigres del Norte, who are really famous and still active to this day. They had some songs about drugs and other famous figures in the cartel. I'll play a song by Chalino Sanchez. This particular video is pretty interesting though, because it's the last song he played before he died. At the beginning, you'll see him opening a note, and that note we don't know, but is speculated to be from the cartel telling him that he's gonna die, because they found him the next morning in a ditch. So, yeah.
Tengo el alma enamorada, no más de pensar el corazón, de soñarme noche a noche, dueño de tu amor. Tengo el alma enamorada, muy enamorada, mi bien. Si me das toda tu vida, yo te la doy también. Tengo el alma enamorada, no más de pensar el corazón, de soñarme noche a noche, dueño de tu amor. Tengo el alma enamorada, muy enamorada, mi bien. Si me das toda tu vida, yo te la doy también. Di si tu corazón tiene otro amor o tiene otro cariño. Di si no hay otro amor, porque mi corazón morirá por ti. Pero yo te puedo esperar. Si me dejas esperando me vas a matar. No me niegues tu mirada porque yo la quiero soñar, y mi alma enamorada a ti te quiere más. Y yo no sé si tú me quieras, pero yo te puedo esperar. Si me dejas esperando me vas a matar. No me niegues tu mirada porque yo la quiero soñar, y mi alma enamorada a ti te quiere más. Di si tu corazón tiene otro amor o tiene otro cariño. Di si no hay otro amor, porque mi corazón morirá por ti.
Yeah, rest in peace, Chalino Sanchez. This song is actually interesting because it has nothing to do with the cartel. I just chose it because it was the last one he recorded before he died. So you will notice an interesting, instrumental shift. The first song was very much guitar heavy. That was like pretty much the only instrumentation. Here it's more accordion and whatnot. There's still a guitar, but Corridos Tumbados actually has a very big influence on, big focus on guitars. But in this period, guitars sort of receded from being the main focus. But we'll talk about how they came to be more guitar-centric with the next slide. So yeah, Ariel Camacho, a very famous, Mexican singer. He died really young, at age 22 in a car crash. Nothing to do with the cartel in this case, but he was, pretty instrumental and is cited as an influence for a lot of the main Corridos Tumbados stars. He put himself in narco narratives, which is pretty different from a lot of the old narco corridos, which would just tell about like, oh, this, cartel leader did this. As far as I can tell, he didn't actually, he wasn't implicated in the cartel. He kind of just talked about it. He had an agricultural background. But yeah, he's notable for popularizing the sierreño style of corrido, which is, very much focused on Mexican 12-string guitar. I'll talk about that a bit more later, but it became like a staple of the corrido tumbado genre. And El Karma, Hot Latin #1, you'll see that it was his most famous song. After he died, it became really popular in Mexico and even in the US, as that chart shows. And, he's one of the main figures that prefigured the development of Corridos Tumbados. As you can see, the narco stuff is pretty heavily emphasized in this kind of music. This song specifically, as the video shows, is about him, betraying people and killing them. And, it's all part of business. So, yeah, next slide. So, yeah, after, Ariel Camacho sort of, started this new movement in corrido music, it led to the development of what we're talking about now, Corridos Tumbados. Corrido is a kind of regional Mexican music that, with Corridos Tumbados, sort of came to be inflected with urban elements. A lot of the lyrical content is very reflective of rap, and as we'll see later, the aesthetics of the videos and just of the culture in general. We'll see later that they also have a connection with reggaeton and other urban Latino genres. And like I said, sierreño guitar from the video we just saw is pretty heavily played up. This song, Soy el Diablo, is, as far as I can tell, the first corrido tumbado that was ever written and recorded. It's by Nathaniel Cano, but it was actually written by his friend, Dan Sanchez, who grew up, in the typical, northern Mexican home, but, was really interested in rap music. And he had the idea, hey, what if we, mix this stuff with the traditional Mexican music? And he had legal issues, so we couldn't actually, finish the song or do anything with it. And his friend ended up doing it and becoming really famous. So. Yeah, so this song essentially gave birth to a new movement, and Rancho Humilde is important because they're sort of the biggest record label in the genre, and we'll talk about the artists that are signed to them later on. Yeah, so as far as corridos go, the main instruments are, as you can see, the Mexican 12-string guitar, which is an interesting modification of the guitar. It's not like they have 12 different kinds of strings. It's 2 of each of the 6 strings. For whatever reason, in Mexico, they just decided to modify the guitar, and it creates a really interesting sort of harmonic sound that's very unique to the genre. Horns, in general, tubas or sousaphones, or a lot of different kinds of horns, that it gives you this, as you can hear, sort of a more full-bodied sound. There's actually a lot of German immigrants in Mexico, which is why horns are so prevalent in Mexican music. If you've ever heard banda, it's pretty similar to polka. Tololoche is a really interesting instrument because it's a double bass, but smaller and easier to carry. It's the main bass instrument, but also a percussive instrument. As we'll see in some of the videos later, Tololoche players will hit the strings to produce a sort of percussive sound. It sounds like a click while also playing the bass line. So that's an interesting distinctive feature. And accordions, which are accordions. And the thing is, not every song will use all four of these instruments. There's sort of different styles. As we heard, the song before didn't really have accordions or much horns, but they're just sort of the staples of the genre that you'll find, in different combinations. Yeah, so these are the main figures I'll focus on for the genre that are, some of the biggest figures right now. We have Natanael Cano, Peso Pluma, Junior H, Chino Pacas, and Fuerza Regida. If you know anything about Mexican music, you've likely heard of Peso Pluma. I don't know if you guys have heard any of the other ones, but they're really big, especially in Mexico, but also in the United States due to the Mexican population. And I'll go through each of them and some of their songs and stuff. So starting with Natanael Cano, who you've already heard with Soy el Diablo. He was born in Hermosillo, Sonora, which is northern Mexico, northwest. It's a pretty, desert city. Like I said, he was greatly influenced by Adiel Camacho. That song you heard by Adiel Camacho, El Todo Encartado, he actually did a cover of it with Spotify. And in many respects, he's the creator of Corridos Tumbados. Like I said, he was one of the first members of Rancho Humilde, and he has 8 studio albums now, so he's quite prolific. And as far as my favorite songs for him go, there's Brillo, which means shine, or shine if you happen to be a German idealist. We have Porte Exuberante, Se Murió, Soy el Diablo, Eres, and El Drip. And yeah, next song. This is Brillo. You might notice that at this point the videos don't really have much of the traditional Mexican content, and the aesthetics come to be replaced more by hip hop adjacent ones. That's a big part of the international success it's had. It's while the music remains distinctively Mexican, the aesthetics become a bit more international, and even that video was in the Dominican Republic, which explains part of its success in broader Latin America and even United States and Canada. So. So, Peso Pluma, he's a big one. He's one of the most famous artists and probably the most famous Mexican artist right now. Won't say all time because Luis Miguel exists, but he was born in Jalisco. It's actually interesting because his dad was Lebanese, or of Lebanese Mexican heritage. There's a lot of Lebanese people in Mexico. And his mom is from Badiraguato, Sinaloa, which is the same town where El Chapo is from. So that's a cool little connection there. Yeah, he's one of the main popularizers of Corridos Tumbados. His song Ella Baila Sola is the most streamed Mexican song of all time, and he remains the most streamed Mexican artist of all time. You might have heard it already, so I won't play it, and I prefer other songs anyways. He was threatened by a certain cartel, so similar to the Chalino Sanchez thing, the Cartel Jalisco Nueva Generación. In his songs, he tends to, hype up the Sinaloa cartel and El Chapo, and this cartel didn't really like it. So they said, if you come to Tijuana and play your show, I believe this was in November, we'll kill you. He didn't play the show for obvious reasons. So yeah, my favorite songs by him are Rosa Pastel, which refers to this kind of like pink drug that the cartel sells. They call it 2CB, but it's not. La People is another good one. PRC, Las Morras, y Lady Gaga. This is Rosa Pastel. Yeah, so you might have noticed it's pretty evident that the video was filmed in Amsterdam, and that's because the song is basically about a young cartel dealer that works in Amsterdam and is trying to work up, the ranks. To talk about the lyrics, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, so I won't read out the translation just for time reasons, but the song is pretty interesting for a variety of reasons. Like he talks about how his dad inspired him in a lot of ways, which sort of speaks to like the familial aspect in a lot of these narco families. It's a bit of a family tradition, if any of you guys know Hank Williams Jr. But another interesting point is when he says, "Saludos pa'l boss que está junto a Dios." There he says that like pay respects to the boss who sits next to God, which is really interesting. It shows sort of the way that the cartel understands the boss and the hierarchy of the cartel as being quasi-divine, and the amount of respect that goes towards someone that is at the head of the cartel and that's required to succeed within the drug trade. another aspect, the international staging. The fact that they're doing it in Amsterdam sort of shows that not only is this music not like just aesthetically Mexican, but it's branching out to other areas. And in this particular case, also talks about like the international trade networks of the cartel. And like I mentioned earlier, like Rosa Pastel is 2CB/Tusi. Tusi is like literally just, I don't know, just the way you would write it in Spanish. It's not 2CB. Like if you ever get the chance to try it, don't. So yeah, Junior H, who is one of my personal favorite artists. I mean, I like all of these, but Junior H might be my favorite. He was born in Sedano, Guanajuato, and he became famous on YouTube, recording his own songs and eventually signed with Rancho Humilde. It's interesting. He started recording once he left Mexico and moved to Utah. He was working as a line cook at Wendy's and decided to record some songs. He didn't check back on them for like a month, and once he did, he saw that it had like 2 million views, and that sort of kickstarted his career. Like I said, he has a bit of a sad boy persona, and that's not me saying that, that's his albums. I don't know, man. Like sometimes he just seems a little bit depressed, but it's fine. I tend to find that he has some of the most inventive lyrics in Corridos Tumbados. A lot of the lyrical content in this genre isn't like, very deep, so to speak, but I find his like wordplay, quite interesting and quite engaging. But some of my favorite songs by him is Como Jordan, Los Botones Azules, Se Amerita, Disfruto lo Malo, La Cherry, y Me Consume. Yeah, so in this song, Junior H is kind of just talking about like, again, I don't think he's actually in the cartel, but this is like talking as someone, who joins the cartel and his experience in that and like his motivations, which he says is, he's trying to pay for his I think it's his sister's schooling and everything. And if we'll look at the lyrics, it's kind of a bit of a Walter White situation where, he starts with this goal and ends up, getting a little bit corrupted. Again, I won't read the lyrics for time reasons, but essentially in the chorus, what he's saying is, listing all the things that come along with his lifestyle, like, women, money, drugs, everything, and how it's all just, filling up the hole inside of him because he still feels empty because it's, just vacuous. And yeah, I mean, well, the contrast is pretty apparent there, especially if you've listened to the Spanish. Materialism, just how much narco-culture is focused on, money and drugs and women and all of these material goals, but as far as substantive purpose, it might be a bit lacking. It also shows a bit of hip-hop culture. A lot of rap songs, especially from the 90s or even now, will make parallels to Michael Jordan, and he does too, which is Como Jordan. He's comparing himself to Jordan as far as the drug trade goes, which is the cool comparison and crossover. And also religious themes. At the end he says, Entre placeres se la lleva el viejo, which is a bit of a, hard to interpret lyric, but I kind of take it as God. It's just if you guys know anything about the Bible, I've heard it described as Ecclesiastes music before, in the sense that, vanity of vanities, everything he gains is just, doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. So now on to Chino Pacas, who was really young, was born in 2007, and he broke out last year actually, and he signed with Street Mob Records, and he reminds me of Chief Keef in that respect because he's really young, and as we'll see in the video, it's really interesting how young he is with the stuff he's doing. He's definitely the youngest star in the scene, and he's really blown up. His first song became a hit single that I'll play for you later, and he's not even 18 yet, which will be really interesting once you see the video. But my favorite songs by him are El Gordo trae el mando, Dijeron que no le iba a lograr, Yo preferí chambear, y Gorra LA. This song that I'll play for you, he's kind of just listing all his homies in his street gang. Yeah, I mean, start him young, right? But this is actually an interesting video. I don't know if you guys paid attention to the bass player, but it's a really good example of how they pluck the strings but also hit them to produce a sort of percussive sound. And it also shows the extent to which this culture is having an influence on younger people, which has been a controversial theme with the Mexican government and Mexican culture in general, but that's the topic for another day. Yeah, so the last big group we'll focus on is Fuerza Regida, which is actually a band. So they were founded in San Bernardino, California. They're like the only one of these that weren't initially born in Mexico, but of course they're Mexican American. Similarly to Junior H, they started. They were a cover band, but then they started uploading their own original songs on YouTube, and they signed with Rancho Humilde, unsurprisingly. They actually keep a really close connection to sort of like Mexican American culture. I read an article about how they did a show at like a quinceañera venue, and a quinceañera is just sort of like it's like a coming of age party for young girls in Mexico, and it's not the kind of place you'd see an artist as big as Fuerza Regida usually. So the lead vocalist is Jesus Ortiz Paz, the backing vocalist and 12-string guitarist Samuel Jaimes, rhythm guitarist Cristian Ramos, sousaphone player, sousaphone is like a kind of tuba, Jose Pelon Garcia, and tololoche player Moises Lopez. They're definitely the most popular band in corrido music, and I tend to find that their songs are more like banda inflected. It's another genre of regional Mexican music that makes a big, focuses on horns and that kind of stuff, which I mentioned earlier, kind of sounds like polka. These songs don't really sound like polka though, and the lyrical themes aren't really like polka either. But my favorite songs by them are Te Cueme, which is an abbreviation for Te Quiero Mucho, which is like, I love you. The point of the song is like, girls tell him that when they see his BMW. So Sabor Fresa, which is like strawberry flavor. It is also a pun. Fresa is also used to refer to sort of like rich girls. So he's just talking about how he likes rich girls. Crazies, Mi Terra Si Alén, Culiacán, Whiskey con Agua, and El Dinero Los Cambio. This is Te Cueme. Yeah, I'm really not sure why, but Lennon Rhodes is in this video, which is kind of funny. He also shouts out El Chapo, seems to be a common trend. Yeah, so we're not really going to go into depth with these guys, but these are just some honorable mentions, some really popular figures. Javi, whose song La Diabla is, currently really famous. If Junior H is the sad guy, Javi's like the bitter guy. It's just an interesting thing I've noticed. Oscar Maidon, his song Fin de Semana with Junior H. Calle 24, Que Onda, he did some songs with Fuerza Regida. And Herencia de Patrones, Cosas de la Clica. This is a really good song. They're not this, Herencia de Patrones isn't as big as the other guys, but it's one of my favorite songs in the genre that I would like to play for you guys. Yeah, this song is essentially just about his life in the cartel, like a lot of these songs tend to be, but this one's particularly interesting. He just talks about the things he had to do to move up in the ranks. There's a point where he apologizes to his mom for joining the trade, and he's like, well, it's nobody's fault, I chose this life. But it's interesting. He talks about how he does it for his family, but at the end of the day, it's he has to do what he has to do. Yeah, so just to briefly touch on sort of the fact that this genre has become international, and it's forged connections with other genres, particularly in Latin America, especially Urbano, which reggaeton or other Latin trap, other genres of that kind. A few examples would be Peso Pluma's Bizarrap session. Bizarrap is a Argentinian producer that's really big in reggaeton. That'll play for you guys in a bit. And then Nat El Cano and Bad Bunny, as you can see, they're in Miami, probably clubbing. But Soy El Diablo, actually, Bad Bunny did a remix, so he's on the remix version of that song. It's pretty good, but I prefer the original. And Rao and Junior H, a big reggaeton star, and Junior H, who was featured on his latest album. There's a lot more examples, but these are just some that I personally like. Well, as you can see, Peso Pluma was pretty excited to be part of that. That's because Bizarrap is actually somewhat important, or pretty important. He's kickstarted a few people's careers, and as far as I can tell, Peso Pluma is the first Mexican, or at least regional Mexican artist to be featured on there. So you can definitely see some of the crossover elements, as far as sure, the guitar is there, but there's also a lot of electronic elements. And next slide. Yeah, so as far as like the crossovers with Urbano go, there's similar trends in other regional Mexican genres. So one example would be Grupo Frontera, who's a up and coming norteño cumbia group from Texas. They did a collab with Bad Bunny. Grupo Firme from Tijuana, they do Pacific norteño, which is like a slightly different style of cumbia, and some of these differences like aren't as apparent, but if you listen to a lot of the music, then like you'll definitely notice some of the stylistic changes. They did a song with Maluma, who's from Colombia. And then just aesthetic shifts like Yeritza y su esencia. They're from Washington. They do like cumbia also. They have this one song called Fragile, which is like a really emotional ballad, but like she has this like Yankee hat on, so it's an interesting thing with like the aesthetic shifts. Yeah, so this is Un Por Ciento, which is Grupo Frontera's collab with Bad Bunny. As you can hear, cumbia is a pretty different genre. Like regional Mexican has a lot of diversity within it, but it's usually characterized by the kind of chuntata. That's what they call it, the sort of drum pattern, which is pretty bouncy. It's very much danceable music. And Bad Bunny, like, he's down with the culture, so to speak, as far as like he's featured in a lot of songs and like collabs with Mexican artists. But he's like one of the most recognizable voices in Latin American music, and he's from like Puerto Rico, so it's a pretty notable shift, like as far as him singing on one of these Mexican songs. But yeah, so that's everything I have for you guys. That's my cat. And I hope you guys enjoyed, and you guys got a taste of like Corridos Tumbados and just regional Mexican music in general.
Are there any female artists in this genre?
Female artists, yes, there are. Very few, though, unfortunately. Like Rancho Humilde has two. Natalie Lopez and Yvonne Galas. They're not as big, not as popular, not as prolific. This genre does tend to be pretty male-centric, as a lot of regional Mexican genres tend to be, but that's unfortunate.
I noticed that like most of
I mean, I agree, but it does tend to be like a thing that's found in a lot of other genres. The whole concept of session musicians, or like we can look at Sturgill Simpson in country music. He has a band. Like his guitarist is from Estonia. He's crazy. I don't know if you guys like country at all, but like he's not like. It's Sturgill Simpson is the main act. As far as like recognition, I do agree, but I don't know. I don't think it's something unique to Corridos necessarily. But yes, I do agree that these guitarists should get more love. It's interesting with corridos. Since it originated as storytelling, as far as I can tell, most of these artists aren't actually in the drug trade. They kind of just talk about it, and a lot of the time, like the commission thing is still a big thing. Like cartels have historically and continue to pay artists to sing songs about them. As far as like why the narrative shift happened, that just seems to be something that like occurred in the wake of Ariel Camacho. It's sort of like this shift that's like closer to hip hop, because you talk about what you did. So I wouldn't say in general no, because if you are being honest, it's also a problem in hip hop, but self-snitching. And if you're talking about your involvement with a certain like group in the cartel and you have such a high profile, that's a very easy way to get killed. So I would say not necessarily. Um, as far as like influence in hip hop among the Mexican American population, I'm not sure. I'd have to look into that. But it has like made its way into like other like genres in Latin America. Carol G is like a famous reggaeton artist, but she used like requintos, like the guitar style of corridos in one of her songs, and like there's increasing collaboration between the two. So it has sort of like come to be, you know, reintegrated in some sense. But as far as like specifically in hip hop, I don't know of much, but I'd be interested to look into that. Well, religion and the cartel is a really interesting topic in general, but you raise a good point. I would say that, like, in some ways, Latin American Catholicism is somewhat overplayed. I would say, like, yes, it's very important culturally, but like most Latin, like, well, I wouldn't say most, but a lot of Latin Americans aren't like devout. Like, they call themselves Catholics, and they are in some sense, but they don't like necessarily practice very much. Religious themes do still pop up. Like, the devil is important. Like, an interesting thing with the cartel is, you know, there have been like saints or sort of like religious figures like La Santa Muerte, where, you know, there's veneration of like the, you know, Lady Death, and just sort of like new religious movements that develop out of narco culture that's like, you know, praying to, you know, death itself. Or there's I forget his name right now, but there's another figure that's like the they view him as the saint of like, you know, criminals and all of that. So religion does play a big role. As if it's Catholicism so much, I wouldn't say so. But there, in the Chino Pacas video, there's an interesting shot of like an ashtray with you know, the Virgen of Guadalupe, like the Virgin Mary, with weed on it. So I think that that might show like some of the attitudes towards, you know, Catholicism among the cartel in general, but not always.
Is he doing music now?
Dan Sanchez. Well, I watched an interview. He just said legal troubles. Nathaniel Cano was his friend. Like, it's not like he just like stole it. He like presented it and like sort of pitched the project to Nathaniel Cano. But I assumed he was incarcerated and like, you know, wasn't able to. And Nathaniel Cano just kind of, you know, took off from there. In the interview with Dan Sanchez talks about like, I had the idea, but, you know, Nathaniel Cano was really the one that followed it through. So if he's doing music now, to be honest, I don't think so. Although I have to look into it. He's not like big in that respect, but I think it was interesting to find out that it wasn't actually Nathaniel Cano that wrote the song. I guess it just talks about like, you know, the importance of friendship.
Or do you see it up and coming trend?
Well, the dominant theme tends to be the cartel and the cartel lifestyle. You can think about like trap music. A lot of it is about like selling drugs or, you know, being in gangs. So it's sort of a similar thing where it's like, it's not that they can't broach other subject matter. It just tends to be like what's emphasized in the culture and, you know, the context it came out of. Like there are like, as far as like other songs go, they tend to be love songs. Like it's either like the cartel and selling drugs or like talking about some woman. Usually like regretfully, which I don't know if that has anything to do with the other subject matter, but it might. But yeah, like the cartel is like the main focus, both like in the lyrics and in the videos. Like even Ella Baila Sola, this famous song that I didn't play for you guys. If you guys want to look into it, it's pretty good. The video it's like just about like a woman that's like dancing by herself, which is what the title means, and, you know, just like talking to her and being infatuated or whatever. But the video is at like a cartel party. So this is like a cartel woman in a cartel event very much hyping up like the cartel lifestyle and the glamour associated with it. So everything, like all the narratives are very much implicated within this culture. So I would say it's generally inextricable, but some people have proposed, a difference between Corridos Tumbados and Corridos Bélicos, sort of like the musical style of Corridos Tumbados, and Corridos Bélicos would be the same, but specifically ones that focus on the cartel. I personally think it's a bit of an artificial distinction, though. Like, most of them tend to be about this, so. Well, you would think so, but Sam Bernardino, like, he's from California. He talks about El Chapo. An interesting example would be, like, Peso Pluma. Like, his mom is from where El Chapo's from, but he was born in Jalisco, and the cartel that threatened him was the Jalisco cartel. So, but because he supports El Chapo, who's from Sinaloa. So I do think, like, in general, allegiances tend to be sort of regional, but I wouldn't say exclusively. Like, especially since, all these cartels have a really big range at this point, so it's more so like, personal affiliation and sort of like what group you've aligned with through your own connections. Unfortunately, I have not actually been to any Corridos Tumbados concerts. They don't tend to come to Canada due to audience reasons. But like, there were concerts in like Montreal and Toronto, but that's a lot of money. As far as like how they are, like, yeah, some mosh pits, but if you saw like the Chalino Sanchez video, it's like people dancing in the audience, so that still tends to be a pretty big focus. With the more hip hop elements, like Peso Pluma and people like Fuerza Regida, like at the end of the day, they're like hype music, so it'll be like a hype concert.
Thank you, Camilo, for the amazing seminar. I'm just gonna hit stop on the recording. Two big announcements, I guess. So